Oh, what's going on, guys? It's Matt from RC Overload. Welcome back. So it's been an interesting winter. Sakura D4 build is, the kit itself is built, but we still need to put the electronics in it. We still need to paint up the body, and I got some scale accessories and detailed stuff that we're going to put on it as well. That's coming up here in the next month or two. Still working on everything, plus I got a ton of other builds going on, as you guys know. The Pro 2 build's coming up shortly, probably by the end of this week, hopefully. Got some more work done to that. And then in the meantime, we're still working on the Baja build, which, guys, that is taking a turn for the worst, actually, right now. We've run into quite a few complications, which I will explain a little more when I come up to that video. I'm just waiting for some more confirmation emails and figure out some other stuff that's going on with it. Time is not on our side right now. So, try and do the best I can on the Baja build. We've run into problems, but like I said, I'll get to that shortly. And for all of you guys that have been asking over and over and over again about the ECX Torment build series, I am getting to that, I promise. Looking at February is when I will start that build series up again. Got some ideas for it. I'm working on getting the parts for it right now. So I'm aiming for February to get that thing started for you guys, because I know a lot of you guys are asking for what are the best upgrades, what are some cool things to do to it, and so forth, and I promise you we will get there. But in the meantime, I got a few other videos that I got to get out before we get into the Pro 2 and the Baja and the ECX Torment. One of those videos is what I'm covering today. As you guys know, I have my SCX10 here that I've been working on for almost a year now, actually. Last year in March was the last time this thing was out running. And honestly, I miss it. Trying to do the best I can at getting it out, except I want it done my way. I want to use all the parts that I want, so if I have to wait to get a certain part, then I will wait. And that's pretty much what's been happening. That, and it's been kind of pushed off into the back burner a little bit. But every so often, like today, we get a new upgrade in, or a new part in, and I want to make a video for you guys. So, what is today's video? Well, it's nothing special because the truck still looks the same. Or the Jeep. But I've installed a Panhard Bar Kit, and this is actually a new one that just came out. It's made by STRC Racing. It's actually a different design than most manufacturers have made. So I wanted to talk about it a little bit, and I wanted to show you guys how I have it set up in my Jeep. The only problem is my Jeep is not a factory setup. I have 100mm shocks in there, the King shocks in there. And I have the SSD Racing Axles in this. So the setup is not quite the same as what STRC's setup is. However, I'm going to try to do my very best at explaining everything and how to install it and how to set it up for both the stock and if you have a setup similar to this, okay? So what I'm going to do is actually bring the camera in closer, give you guys more of a front look here, and show you everything as best as I can. So, let's do it! Okay guys, so now that I'm zoomed in a little bit, hopefully I can give you a better perspective of this setup here. So let's talk about what STRC actually provides in the kit here. Even though mine's all completely set up, I had to do several test runs here, because again, my setup is different than the stock setup. So, the kit, when you order the Panhard Bar Kit from STRC, what you will receive is actually this bar that connects both the front knuckles, okay? The linkage that goes from your steering servo down to the knuckle as well. You'll also receive another one of these links that actually goes to the back, the control arms back here, which I'll explain that in a minute. And then you'll actually receive the Panhard bar itself and then all the necessary hardware. The only things that don't come with the kit is the actual rod ends. You will need to actually pick those up from Axial unless you want to use your old ones that are in there. But I do recommend that if you're taking it all apart, might not be a bad idea to go ahead and replace the rod ends anyways. most likely worn out. So let's talk about the actual setup, the process of it, and then I'll explain in detail my setup and what the differences are in between the stock setup versus my setup, right? So the stock setup basically has you do basically what you're seeing right here. The Panhard bar goes from this bracket, right? There's a little bracket in the corner. The Panhard bar goes from there all the way down to the upper knuckle, which hopefully you guys can see that back in there. So they tried to make the rod length almost as long as the actual steering length of the vehicle, because what that does is actually helps prevent bump steer, right? When you're lifting it up and it pushes the servo, kinda. You see on some other Panhard bar kits and so forth. However, on this setup, even with my changes, I don't experience that at all. Now, I'll know better once I take it out. But, so they give you that bracket up there, right? They also provide you with these two brackets here to mount your steering servo to the frame, because that's what you're doing, right? You're installing the Panhard bar kit so you can install the servo on the frame instead of having it on your axle. So they give you the two brackets. You mount your servo up to the brackets that are attached to the frame. Run your linkage on the back side of your servo horn, right? Okay. But the other thing that you guys will notice that I don't have installed on mine is the linkage for the upper control arms. Whoop, my bad. As you will notice, I still have a 4-link control arm set up in my SCX10. Now, STRC recommends that you actually use the 3-link setup on your stock axle system. That actually takes one of the rod links that he gives you and attaches it to the frame. So you're only using 3 links. And this will allow for a better articulation and all that other good stuff that comes with it. However, my setup, I could not do that. Why is that? Well, the STRC axles are different than the stock axle housings. I think I have a stock one right over here. This is the stock axle housing, okay? It is different. Now, the housing that has the 3-link setup, which I don't have anymore, that is long gone, would actually have the connection right in the middle, so it would split out into a Y setup, right, as most of you guys are familiar with. That's the setup that you would use. Mine, however, the measurements are off because of the way, and maybe I can do this. If you guys look right down in there, right where those rod ends connect, on the SSD axle housings, that actually pushes the rod lengths in just a hair. So the rod that comes with it is not the correct length. It will cause binding in this. You won't even get it connected to the frame. So if you are running SSD axles, you will need to still continue using the 4-link setup, okay? If you're running the stock axles, run that single rod off the 3-link setup and attach it to your frame. Now I'll try to post some pictures here from STRC Racing and post them up in the video here for you so you kind of get an idea as far as what I'm talking about. But that is probably the biggest difference, is mine has the 4-link setup, which does not seem to affect this whatsoever. But again, if you are running 90mm shocks and the stock axle housings from Axial, then you will want to run that 3-link setup. Hopefully I'm clear enough on that, you guys. I know, unfortunately, I couldn't show it on this because my setup is totally different than the stock setup on a normal SCX10. Plus I'm running 100mm shocks, right? Gives me that extra height. So, moving on to now another change that I had to make on my setup. Otherwise, pretty much everything's going to look exactly the same. Your ride height's going to be down a little bit more, and you might end up getting a little more flex out of this than with mine. But one thing I had to do to prevent some bump steer out of this, because of my ride height, I actually needed to take my servo and mount it down lower than what it's recommended by STRC. STRC actually recommends that on these bottom mounts on the servo is actually where you attach it to their mounts, right? So instead of using these top ones, you would use the bottom two. However, I did that and I noticed that when I did go to flex like so, my servo did move like that, right? Oops. So I decided to try just moving my servo down, mounting it up like so, and as you guys can see, and I'll try to do this without moving the servo, there is no movement out of that servo horn, right? Nothing there. I'll even push down. It's a perfect setup. So that is the only two differences between my setup versus a stock setup, is I did have to lower my servo down a little bit, and I'm still using a 4-link setup instead of the 3-link setup that STRC Racing recommends that you do. Now, if you have 110 or 120 millimeter shock height, this probably will not work for you. As it is, I already had to, you know, what's the correct way of saying this? The rod ends, I had to make them a little bit longer than the recommended length because, again, my height is different from this point to this point versus a stock height, which would actually sit a little bit something more like that. You know, it'd be down a lot more, but again, I'm running the 100 millimeter shocks and I'm pretty much maxed out. So, now the question is, does this limit my suspension? With my setup, it limits it by only a couple of centimeters, in all honesty. In the back, when I go to do my articulation with the tires, and I take measurements from the bottom point of the tire, right? I get about 4.3 inches of flex out of the back, right? Before the front tire starts coming up off the ground. And that goes for both sides, 4.3 in the back. I get exactly 4 inches on both left and right side in the front. So I'm only off by 0.3 inches, which is only a couple of centimeters, really. So the flex really isn't that bad, and that's about max, and actually my shock is actually what's causing the stopping, really. Now, if I really wanted to get this thing to flex by pushing on everything, I do get a little bit of binding, okay? And again, that is because of this setup right here. Again, if I was running the stock setup, I wouldn't actually have any binding whatsoever out of using the Panhard Bar Kit. There wouldn't be any hitting of the axle housing, there wouldn't be any hitting of the servo. But unfortunately, at the very last spot of my flex, it does touch, right? So if I flex the passenger side, the Panhard bar actually, at full height, does just start to touch the bottom of the servo. And again, that's because I had to lower my servo down. If I flex it on the driver's side, it actually stops, you know, at the full flex mark. It actually stops right on the 4-link truss right here. I believe that's what that's called, the truss of the axle, where the upper links go. Right about where my finger is touching is where the bar is actually touching. Now, I could probably grind that down a little bit, but I don't want to do that right now. I still have some good flex out of this truck, and I am not worried about it. So, let's flex it out. So yeah, I do have some stopping issues, but again, that is because of my setup. If I had the servo mounted higher and it was down at the stock height, I would probably get probably pretty close to the same flex points that I have now with the stock setup. Not 100% sure on that. It's been so long since I've had a stock setup on here. But that's it. So hopefully that covers it. I don't think that there was anything else I needed to explain to you guys. Other than just that control arm link setup in the back. Again, if you're running the SSD Axles, you won't be able to use that extra rod that STRC does provide. Again, the length is just too long on it, and it won't reach where it mounts up on the frame. I suppose you could probably drill another hole, but again, as far as to me, it didn't really work out that well. So the axle was actually twisted a little bit. It wasn't straight. So if you're running stock housing, use the three-link setup on the axle, and you'll have one bar that comes right up, and so forth. Again, I'll try to post pictures in the video. Hopefully that'll explain everything a little bit more in depth. If you guys have any questions about this setup, please let me know. As far as I can tell, this is going to be a great setup. Keeps my servo up on the frame, looks a little more scale to me, and it still works very well. I'm actually very excited about it. So, another step forward on the SCX10. There is still more to go. I think next is actually going to be the electronics, the motor, the ESC. We've already gotten a receiver, and we got the servo mounted back up. We got to hook the winch up, get the front bumper re-powder coated here again. You know, it's got some scratches on it, so I want to make it look nice. So we're going to do that, and then it'll be on to the scale accessories. Ooh. So, that's it for the suspension upgrades. Pretty much everything else is stock. Actually, there's nothing stock about this truck other than the frame. And, yeah, so, looks pretty cool. Do a nice close-up view here. One last time, just so you all can see it. And to give you guys a close-up view of where it's hitting, right there. It's not bad. I'm quite impressed with it. I don't mind losing a little bit out of my suspension angle when it's already pretty decent enough. So, thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you guys next time on the next RC Overload.